Hello everyone and welcome to Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. Today I want to share with you what main differences are when you're working in different geographical areas in the world. It may not seem very important, but it is, and I will show you during the video how conditions can drastically change from one place in the world to another, even if we're all in tropical waters and stuff. So please stay with me and let's dive into it.
Hey everyone, if you want to watch the video in other languages, you simply click on settings, go to subtitles, select the subtitles in the original language, then go back to subtitles, activate the translate automatically, and scroll down and select your preferred language. In this case, we chose Spanish, obviously. Thank you so much all, and let's get on with the video.
As I have mentioned in other videos, I started my professional career working in historic shipwrecks and diving in historic shipwrecks in Cuba, my home country. And I worked in Cuba for 14 years in several shipwrecks, always in these Caribbean conditions, which when you're working there and you're working there all the time, you don't find them that idyllic, that nice. But we didn't know. We were working. We consider, for instance, after 11 in the morning or about midday, the normal northeast wind start blowing a little bit harder, and then conditions in the reef got for us a little bit difficult to work because most of the wrecks are in the reef, so they are very shallow. And by midday, we were calling the day. Okay, it's not safe for the divers to be in the reef with this movement. Little we knew that these were really nice conditions. I was surprised when after these 14 years and when I was asked to lead my first expedition outside of Cuba, which was in the Cape Verde Islands, in the Cape Verde Archipelago, I didn't expect conditions to be so different. That's why I want to share that with you guys, and just to put out how different the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic could be in terms of working underwater, doing the same task, more or less in the same depths. So it doesn't change too much on that, and it doesn't change too much about temperature, for instance, because it's obvious that if you're working in the Caribbean and then you're sent to work in the North Sea, the Northern Sea, the water will be, the temperature of the water will be an issue. But no, this is also a tropical place known by everyone, like a very nice touristic destination as well. So I assume that the sea would be as gentle as in the Caribbean. Well, once again, I was mistaken. I arrived in Cape Verde to lead an expedition, an archaeological expedition in 1999. And when I got to Santiago Island, where the capital of Cape Verde is, Ciudad de Praia, I was sent to the expedition boat, and there was my first shock. First, the size of the expedition ship. I was used to work in these small yacht, if we can call them that way, because they were originally meant not for pleasure, for leisure, but they were also fishing boats that for lobster and different kind of fishing activities, but they were mainly small, about 20 meters long, so 60 feet. And all of them were made in Cuba. All of them were made out of fiberglass. So these are light boats with shallow draft, meaning that it was all on purpose because we wanted to get closer to the wreck, which were in the reef, in shallow waters. So the closer to the wreck you are, the more chances you have to put down to the wreck tools and power, because sometimes you have to use compressors to suck the sediment from the place, so the hoses don't need to be that long, so if you are close to the wreck. So this was for us like the way of working on shipwrecks in shallow waters. When I arrived in Cape Verde, I was sent to this big ship of 50 meters, 4 decks, steel. It was a monster. It was a huge ship with a crew. Imagine, in Cuba, our entire team was between 12 and 15 people on board, including the captain, the cook, the engine man, the divers, archaeologists. Everyone was 12 to 15 the maximum. When I arrived in Cape Verde, I got to this big ship, just the crew to maintain the ship. I mean, captain, deckhands, and everyone I mentioned, not the divers. It was about 12 people, almost the entire crew we had in Cuba for everything. Then you have a group of divers who was about 12 as well, plus government, fiscals, and everyone which is normally joins these expeditions to make sure that your work is properly done. So I arrived into that little city floating in the ocean. I got there the first day and I saw this ship. I went straight to the captain and asked him what is the draft of the ship, and he said it's about 5 meters. And I was wondering, 5 meters, we will be very far away from the wreck. And I didn't understand why it was necessary a ship that size. Well, time showed me that it was necessary, and actually it could have been a bit bigger even. but that was my first shock. Why in this country you will use such a large ship when I'm used to smaller, cheaper, and more efficient ones? Because, small team, small ship, really close to the wreck. So my entire plan of how to work a shipwreck start changing a bit. I will not operate the expedition from the mothership, but from a tender, from a Zodiac, from an auxiliary boat, because this ship will never get to the wrecks. The wrecks were, again, on the reef or nearby in shallow places, so this huge ship will never get close enough.
And just of somebody that doesn't have the knowledge, I would assume that if it's so shallow, you need more agility to move, and a dinghy or a Zodiac gives you, or the perception of more agility, I guess.
Yes, even if you manage to get this big ship nearby the reef, if, let's say, if condition worsen in a bit like normally does, and they start getting really worse, the entire maneuver of taking the ship, this big ship, out of trouble, it is incomparable to a small Zodiac or something you can really get out of the place quick.
Yep.
So yes, you're right on that. But that was my first shock: the size of the ship. How do I plan a proper archaeological excavation, having this floating hotel, not the expedition ship as I consider it before going to Cape Verde. The second shock was that, okay, I had this large team that was about 30 people, all in all, 30 people, which I didn't speak their language at all. We were in Cape Verde. There was an international team, but mainly Cape Verdeans, the crew, divers. Most of my team were Cape Verdeans. In Cape Verde, they speak Portuguese, but their language is Creole. I didn't know even Portuguese, let alone Creole. So I started learning both languages at the same time in a rush to try to communicate with my team, because communication is essential. If you want something to be done, and in our work, the details matter. When you want to do a certain task, you have to be accurate enough to convey that message to the diver that will do that task, unless you end up doing everything by yourself because you were not able to express yourself in a proper way. For me, it was a nightmare. Thank God, in the team, there were 2 or 3 members which were from Germany or France, and they already knew some Creole. South Africa, and Julian became a very good friend. They already manage the language, they speak English, so we started communicating between us, and slowly I started learning how to communicate myself with the crew. But just put yourself in my shoes, moving from conditions which were very easy to work. I mean, we communicate our decisions in the team very easily. We all spoke the same language. The conditions in the sea in Cuba all were super fantastic. And then you arrive there, you have this big boat that looks like difficult to handle. And on top of it, you don't speak the language. So those were my first two big shocks. Obviously, I was 34 years old. I was full of energy and motivation, and I wanted to make that happen and wanted to make that work. So it was a challenge, but it was a nice challenge with at least these first two drastically different conditions I was used to. Another shocking difference was the sea conditions. Remember that I said that in Cuba after 11 in the morning or midday, as soon as the wind picked up a little bit and there was these little waves of probably 1 meter, 1.5 meter, we already left the wreck, which were in the reef, and started doing other tasks a little bit deeper because we considered it unsafe for the divers in these conditions. Well, when I arrived in Cape Verde, got the ship. The ship was in the city of Praia, actually in Ciudad de Velia, which is a very old town nearby Praia. The ship was on anchor there. I joined the ship with the Zodiac there. I got to my cabin, and then we moved to the north side of Mayo to start working in the Princess Luisa, which I mentioned in another video is a very challenging wreck because of the big waves and stuff. And we anchored there, we slept, and in the morning I went to the mess room where we had our breakfast. For me also was the first time to have a mess room because in our ships in Cuba, we normally eat with a plate in your hand. You didn't even have a table. You eat like this, and you finish, you clean your dish. So there was not like a formal place where you could sit and eat with both hands. That was in the sea was new to me. You normally eat with one hand, and the other one is for the plate. So I arrived in this beautiful mess room. The entire team was having breakfast there. And me with my coffee, I went and looked through the porthole because it was in the direction of the wreck. The reef was nearby the ship. Well, nearby is a way of saying because it was about 1 mile away. But you could see that it was white water. It was breaking furiously. It was breaking in a way that I said, but very confident as I was the team leader. I became the team leader the day before, and it was my task, and I had my coffee and told my South African colleague, Julian, I told him, okay, so we are not diving today. Let's plan other tasks and we can do on board because the conditions are not right for diving. And he looked at me, I will never forget the way he looked at me, and he said, Alex, if we don't dive today, we will not dive in the year. Today is okay. It's a good day. It's a normal day. And I have to swallow my coffee. I said, well, okay, then let's do it. I mean, if I cannot do it myself, let's see, I have to get to the level of these guys. They were doing that every day. I come as a boss, and I was not ready to work in those conditions. Okay, then go to the sea, was terrified all the way to the wreck because it was quite far, all the way to the wreck, and we are approaching the wreck, and I see these big waves. When we had these big waves in Cuba, we were at home. We just stopped the operation, the expedition. You go home, you take 2 or 3 days off when the conditions go back to normal, because waves like that in Cuba only occur when you have a cold front, a very strong cold front, or a hurricane, or any big meteorological event. Yep. Not like normal day. Sí. I had absolutely no experience in Atlantic, so I couldn't imagine that was normal conditions. So we went there. My first dive in the Princess Luisa, with all these really big waves pushing you up and down, it was the 45 minutes in my life that I used more in trying to figure out how the hell would I do my work? How do I manage in these conditions to concentrate, to to orientate people what to do, to control that these things are actually being done, and come with a coherent plan to excavate the wreck, because I spent 45 minutes trying to survive. That was my entire task, was getting alive from there. Okay, that was the first dive. In the second dive, I was a little bit more comfortable. Next day, I started already finding it not that bad. Well, I ended up working in Cape Verde for 4 years, and we did okay. It was just the shock of coming to underwater conditions that you didn't expect.
Unprecedented for you.
Yeah, totally, totally. And at the time, I still didn't have with me some of my old team members in Cuba, that they were with me to different countries. At this moment, I was my own.
Yeah.
So there was nobody that I could even share this fear and this nervousness, that, because I was nervous. Not only because of my safety, I could understand that I will get away alive, but you have a job to do, and I needed to perform and to show that this job can be done in these conditions. They were doing it before I arrived. So that was like a very hard thing to overcome, because on top of it, the water is not as warm as in Cuba. So in Cuba, we were using 3mm wetsuits, which are very comfortable because they are very thin, and your freedom of movement is much better. And then there we were using 5mm, which are a little bit more stiff, and you can move, let's say, less freely. And these, together with the sea conditions, this first dive for me, and I can tell you guys without blushing, this first dive for me was like if I would start learning how to dive again. After 14 years and many thousands of dive hours. It was as shocking as that. Another difference that I could see since the very first moment, it is that in the Caribbean, mainly in Cuba where I was working, a very good indicator that you have found an historic shipwreck was ballast stones. The ballast stone pile in the Caribbean is a very good sign that you are in the presence of historic shipwrecks, because the ballast that they were carrying in the hull to make the ship more stable. These ballasts are normally stones, volcanic stones from rivers or from beaches or from places in which they were collected by the Spaniards or the Portuguese, and because they were very heavy, there's very dense stones. Guess what? You arrive in Cape Verde and these are volcanic islands. So the seabed is naturally made by what you would call ballast stones. What in Cuba, it represented, okay, you have found a wreck. In Cape Verde is that you are looking at the seabed. So that was not an option anymore, to identify that you have a shipwreck because you're seeing ballast stones. You have ballast stones everywhere. So that also, together with everything that I has mentioned, that also posed a new challenge to me. So, okay, now we have to rethink, because what it could have been a great way of being accurate and saying, okay, this is an important site to investigate, it suddenly disappeared. Okay, this is it's not all bad. For instance, due to the strength of the waves and the power of the water, there was not so much sand deposition, there was not so much coral growth, there was not so much algae coverage. So objects, the artifacts or the parts of the ship that still survived and were on the seabed, they were easier to spot than in the Caribbean, that they can be completely covered. So not everything was negative in the way of me adapting to, but then I found also some advantages in seeing the things a little bit more easier. This gave a new difference. Another difference that I found out, and this case was a positive one as well, is that maybe due to the temperature and salinity conditions in the Atlantic, which are slightly different than the Caribbean, artifacts in general that normally degrade very fast in the conditions of the Caribbean, here were not so. So even if you can imagine that these big hydrodynamic forces with the waves and the currents and everything just pounding the wreck for centuries, you could expect that the artifacts are all smashed and all degraded. In reality, they were in better conditions than in general. There are obviously exceptions to it, but in general, the artifacts were in better conditions than in the Caribbean, meaning that you were many times able to spot and identify details on an artifact even on the water before getting it to the conservation center and undergoing the conservation processes. But it still from under the water you were able, there was not so much to see details because there was no so much sea growth or oxidization and the concretion in the artifacts. This came to help a bit because, as I mentioned, the ballast stones and the difficulty that you have to spot a wreck site, then you also have the chance of seeing the objects of the wreck. We could see in Cuba, for instance, I can't remember if there was even one wreck in which could see from the start, when you find the wreck, you could see bottles and you could see cutlery like exposed on the seabed. Still, okay, damaged, but exposed on the seabed that you could say, there is a spoon. The spoon doesn't belong to a reef, so there should be a wreck nearby. And then you take it from there. It's not, okay, ballast stones stop being a very reliable indication of a shipwreck, but now you have something else, the main objects of the shipwreck. So everything was not challenging to me. There were new things I already used in my favor, but I wanted to share with you this probably in a lighter note video, how the researcher, the person who has to work in this, is affected by changing simply from one country to the other, from one geographical area to the other. And this is not counting that, for instance, when I was working in Cuba, our expeditions were 20 days, and then you have 10 days break. In this 10 days break, you go home, you're with your family and everything. When you are moving to another country to do the same type of work and the same expeditions, for the local people, for the people who live in the country they are working in, it's like that. It's 20 days and then 10 days at home. For me, it was 8 months. From the first day till the last day, I have to take my days off in a city which was not mine, that I learned to love and to make new friends and to go out and sightseeing and going to a restaurant together. So, but I was away from my family, which is normally a very good way to ease down all the tension that you take during an expedition. That was also not achievable or was not in my hands in that moment. Me and any other foreigner that would join the expedition, as I mentioned in the beginning, I have 2 or 3. Then it grew in numbers when guys and women coming from other countries to help in the expedition. And that is also, even if it's not technical, even if it's not archaeological, if it's not historical, it's also a great difference that a worker will feel when moving from one geographical area to other. I hope you guys have liked the video. If so, please let me know your comments, and you might have experiences as well. Divers, we are people who travel around the world quite a lot, so let me know what is your perception, what is your own experiences in the comment section, and give a like to the video, subscribe to the channel, share it if you find it interesting. Let's keep in touch and keep on diving.